Okay, we're on chapter 13, which is on the cardiovascular system, also known as the circulatory system. This is podcast 1 out of 3. We're going to take a look specifically at the structure of the heart. So your cardiovascular system, it is a closed system that is composed of your heart and blood vessels. The reason we call it a closed system is the heart is going to pump all of the blood, and that blood is going to be pumped through blood vessels throughout your body, and those blood vessels are going to allow the blood to circulate everywhere. The blood is always enclosed inside of the heart or blood vessels. So the three main parts of your cardiovascular system are the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood itself, which we just did in the last chapter. And that's going to allow it to do its job. So the main function of your cardiovascular system is to deliver oxygen and nutrients to all the different cells of your body, all the cells of your body, and then also to remove carbon dioxide and all the various waste products that get formed through your regular metabolism. So the heart is the main organ of your cardiovascular system, and its job is to pump the blood all throughout your body. So we're going to take a look at the external and then internal structure of the heart. So your heart is a very strong muscle, but it needs to be very highly protected. So it is located right in your thorax, right between your lungs, so it's protected by the rib cage and the sternum. And it has an apex that points down towards the left side of your body. It is usually about the size of your fist and weighs less than a pound, but it does have a tremendous job to do. Okay, so this is what we're talking about here. So here are here's your left lung and your right lung, and your heart slightly more to the left and points down towards the left. And this is considered the apex of the heart. And this is the left side of the heart here, and the left side of your heart is the stronger side of the heart. And we'll see why that is when we get to the circulation piece. All right, so your heart is highly protected. It's got coverings surrounding it. It's made up of a thick wall of connective tissue. And then the inside has many different structures to it. So the coverings of the wall, the covering of your heart is called the pericardium, and you can see cardium here is cardiac, which means heart. So it's a double serous membrane. Remember, all of your organs are bagged inside of membranes, so the heart has its own. It's the pericardium. There's two layers to it, so it's a double layer. The visceral pericardium is the one that's right next to the heart. It's also called the epicardium. And then you have the parietal pericardium, and that is the part that is the outside layer of the heart. And in between those two layers, you have serous fluid, which is going to reduce the friction that will form as your heart is constantly beating. So remember, your heart beats on average probably 70 times a minute. That's a lot of friction that could build up between all these protective layers. So there's fluid surrounding your heart, which protects it. And keeps it working the way it's supposed to be. Now, that's your outermost layer. So if you look at it here, basically your heart looks like it is inside of a bag, and that bag actually has two layers to it. And in between those two layers is your pericardial fluid, and that's the liquid that's there. And some people, if you get an infection or something, sometimes that fluid can build up in there, and that can keep your heart from working efficiently, and that's something that they can actually treat. Okay. So your heart wall, as you go in from your pericardium, you get into the actual structure of the wall. The heart wall is made up of three layers. The epicardium we just talked about, that is the outside layer. It's also called the visceral pericardium, so that's the layer that is in closest contact with your heart. Okay, made up of a connective tissue that's going to kind of keep all of the structures that need to enter into the heart, including the blood vessels that supply the heart muscle itself. Everything gets kind of connected in through there, as well as nerves and whatnot. And then when you move in from that outer layer, you get to the myocardium. This is the middle layer that is mostly cardiac muscle. Okay, it is the thickest layer of your heart, and it is thicker on the left side of your heart than it is on the right side. And then endocardium is the inner lining of your heart, and it's made up of endothelium, which is basically the same as like your skin cells. So all inside of your heart, you have a thin layer of a protective layer of skin on the inside of the chambers of your heart. And that's going to allow the blood to flow everywhere it's supposed to go without penetrating into the heart wall. Okay, so here are your different layers. So again, there is your pericardium that surrounds it. So your epicardium is this outermost layer here. Okay, again, that's your visceral pericardium. And then your myocardium is this whole big thick layer all in here, thick muscle. And then your endocardium is this layer of skin-like structure all on the inside, and that would be the inside of the chamber here. So you can see the little cutout that they did. And again, this is the left side of the wall, and you can see it's quite thick. And when we look at the actual heart, we'll see that the other side of the wall is thinner. The other side of the heart is thinner. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at the internal anatomy of the heart. So we're going to take a look at the structures that are on the inside. So in this picture here, they have taken and basically cut off the front portion of the heart so you can see all the inner structures. And there's 12 major structures within the heart. It's always in fours is the way we're going to look at everything. So we've got the major chambers of the heart. We have the major valves between those chambers, and then we have our great vessels that lead into and out of the heart. So we're going to take a look at each of those. Your heart chambers. So your right and left sides act as separate pumps. Your right side is actually going to pump out to your lungs. So they don't have as far to go. And then your left side of your heart is actually going to pump out to your entire body. So the blood that's coming from there has a long way to go. The two sides are separated by a thick wall of muscle called the septum. So you can see the septum is right here down the middle. And that is basically going to keep the two sections of blood separate from each other, because the blood that's on your left side is high in oxygen and the blood on the right side of your heart is low in oxygen, and so you actually don't want those two mixed together. The heart has 4 chambers. The upper chambers are the atria. It's atrium right here for short. So you have your right atrium and your left atrium. And remember, when we're talking about body structures, it's the opposite of what you would think when you're looking at it. It's what you do right and left. It's what it is in you. These are called your receiving chambers. So they're both going to be taking blood in from places. The right's taking the blood in from the body. The left is taking blood in from the lungs. Your ventricles are your lower chambers, and again, you have a right and left ventricle, and they are bigger chambers, and they're more muscular. And these are your discharging chambers because they're going to be sending blood out. So the left ventricle is going to send blood out to the body, and your right ventricle, you can't really see it in here, but it would kind of go up into these blood vessels in the back. They're going to send that blood out to your lungs. The left is more muscular, and you can see that here. Here's the wall of the right, and here's the wall of the left. Much thicker because it has to pump blood out to your entire body. All right, so within your heart, you have many different valves. Valves are an important part of the way your whole circulatory system works because they're going to make the blood flow in only one direction. You don't want blood going back where it's already been. You always want it going forward. So heart valves and the valves that are inside of your blood vessels are going to allow this to happen. So there's 4 main valves in your heart. Your arterioventricular valves, also called your AV valves for short, they are located between the atria and the ventricles. So the name actually makes sense. They are going to close during ventricular contraction. So when your ventricles contract to pump the blood out of the heart, these valves close, keep the blood from going back up into the atria. So the bicuspid valves, also called the mitral valve, that's on the left side. So it's between your right or your left atrium and your left ventricle. And the tricuspid valve is on the right side, and so that's between your right atrium and your right ventricle. The other types of valves that you have are called semilunar valves. They actually have that name because of the shape. They actually almost look kind of like half moon shape in a way. But these are going to be between a ventricle and an artery. So whichever one you're going from. So when the ventricle relaxes after it's already pumped all its blood out, these valves are going to close to keep the blood from going back down into the ventricle after it just discharged everything. So you have a pulmonary semilunar valve, and that's going to lead from the right ventricle, and that's going to lead out to the lungs, to the pulmonary vein. And then your aortic semilunar valve is going to go from your left ventricle out to your aorta. So once the ventricle contracts, it pushes the blood out into those major blood vessels, and then the blood can't go back. So we always want to keep our blood going in one direction. We don't want it going back. Now, if you have a heart valve, as they open, the blood gets pumped through as the valves are open. And the AV valves, the arterioventricular valves, are actually held in place by something called chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. You can actually see these when we do the heart dissection, but they're called heart strings because they literally look like strings on the inside. But as your different parts of your heart contract and relax, these things are going to pull and, on the valves and open and close them. So they will close to prevent backflow, which is regurgitation. Somebody who has a heart murmur, when these valves close, sometimes they don't close completely, and you get a little bit of backflow, and you can actually hear that. And we'll talk about how that works when we get to how the heartbeat actually happens. But a murmur can cause a little bit of blood to go backwards when it's not supposed to. So here are your major valves. So here's your mitral valve here, between your right or your left atrium and your left ventricle. Okay, so the blood would come down into your left ventricle, and then it's going to go out the aorta. So here's your aortic valve right here. And the blood gets pumped out to the aorta, goes out to the whole body, and everything comes back down into the right atrium from the body. Okay, and here's your tricuspid valve, and so these are the heart strings I was talking about, and they really literally look like strings. The blood comes down through there, and that valve will close when the right ventricle contracts and go out the pulmonary valve, which will lead out to the lungs. Once all the blood's been pumped out of here, and the blood's up into the pulmonary arteries, then this valve will close and the blood will not go backwards. So this is what the valves would look like when they're open, and this is what they look like when they're closed. And so when the mitral valve or the tricuspid valve, those are your AV valves, when those are open, your semilunar valves are closed. The ones going into the blood vessels are closed. When your AV valves are closed, the ones going into the blood vessels are open. And it always works in that direction, back and forth, back and forth. Okay. Now we also have, coming in and out of our heart, are 4 major great vessels. The aorta is the largest blood vessel in your body. It leaves the left ventricle and brings oxygenated blood out to the body. So this is the one that's going to lead from your left ventricle and go out to your entire body. So that's why the left ventricle is much larger than the right. You have pulmonary arteries, and pulmonary means lungs. So your pulmonary arteries are going to leave the right ventricle, and they're going to go to the lungs. And what they're going to do is they're going to bring blood that is low in oxygen, we call it deoxygenated blood, over to the lungs so it can pick up more oxygen. And then it comes back to the other side of your heart. The vena cava is the largest vein in your body, and it's going to enter the right atrium, bringing the deoxygenated blood that is coming from your body all the way back to your heart. And there's 2 branches of the vena cava, superior and inferior. So superior is going to bring the blood from the above your heart, and inferior brings the blood back from below your heart. And then you have 4 pulmonary veins. Again, pulmonary means lungs. So these are going to be coming into the left atrium from the lungs, and they're going to bring oxygenated blood back over into the lungs. Into the heart, and then that will get pumped back out the aorta, out to the whole body. So we'll take a look at the entire circuit that's going to happen, but when you do the dissection, these are all the major structures that you're going to be able to see, which is pretty neat. So you can look at the heart from the outside as well as the inside. So if you look at the heart from the outside, you can see some of the major blood vessels. When we do the dissection, these usually get cut off, so you can't see them quite as nicely, but we can figure out what they are and where they go based on what they lead into inside of the heart. So you can take a look at each of these different pieces within here as we go over the dissection of the heart.